Starting the webinar now.
Welcome, everybody. We'll wait a few minutes until everyone has signed in. Okay, let's wait one more minute and then we get started. Okay, I'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Whitehead Institute's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Speaker Seminar. The goal of these regular seminars is to foster learning, understanding, and action to create a more diverse and inclusive environment at the Whitehead Institute. In commemoration of Hispanic Heritage Month, this afternoon session will explore mass migration and immigration as it relates to those of Hispanic descent. As many of you know, Hispanic Heritage Month is celebrated from September 15th to October 15th, honoring the histories, cultures, and contributions of Americans whose ancestors came from Spain, Mexico, the Caribbean, and Central and South America. Our speaker today, and I'm really delighted to introduce, is Dr. Marcelo Suárez-Orozco, who is presently the Chancellor at UMass Boston. Prior to joining the University of Massachusetts in Boston, Dr. Suárez-Orozco served as the inaugural Wasserman Dean and Distinguished Professor of Education at the University of California at Los Angeles, where he led the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. He's an internationally renowned educator and researcher and has held academic positions at Harvard and NYU. His research focuses on conceptual and empirical problems in the areas of cultural psychology and psychological anthropology, with a focus on the study of mass migration, globalization, and education. His award-winning books, edited volumes, and scholarly papers have had global impact, leading to international service that includes his role as special advisor to the chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Courts in The Hague, and service on the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. Dr. Suárez-Orozco earned his AB in psychology and his master and PhD in anthropology at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Suárez-Orozco's talk is entitled Old Americans, New Americans, Double Americans, Rethinking the Latinx Migration in the Age of Global Vertigo. We will have plenty of time for question and answers, so please type in your questions using the question and answer feature, and we'll try to get as many of them as we can. Please use the question and answer feature, not the chat feature. So I'm so delighted for you to be here virtually. Dr. Suárez-Orozco, you have our rapt attention now.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ruth. I'm so delighted. It's really wonderful to be with you this afternoon. The plan for my lecture today is to first examine broad features of the Latino experience as shaped by the last century of transnational migrations. After exploring the immigrant experience, I will then turn to the matter of the rise of the Latino second generation, with a focus on children and youth and the challenges and opportunities for the education of the Latino Hispanic origin population now and moving forward. The city of Boston is best known around the world for education and immigration. In the Commonwealth, immigration is both history and destiny. It is a story of how the state came to be in its present form, and it is a state where the children of immigrants are now the fastest growing sector of the pre-adult population. Other than our native tribes, the city was formed and transformed by various waves of large-scale migration. Some migrations were voluntary in search of freedom and opportunity. Others were involuntary, as is the case of the arrival of enslaved Africans as early in the Commonwealth as 1638. The mass transoceanic migrations brought millions and millions of new Americans from throughout Europe, especially Ireland, Italy, but also Eastern Europe. The Great Migration of over 6 million Southern blacks moving north served to further diversify our city. The current wave of new immigration now comes largely from Asia, the Afro-Caribbean basin, and Latin America. Simply put, without immigration, then and now, there would not be Boston as we know it. Over the past generation, the mosaic that makes up our population has become more colorful. More than 90% of Massachusetts' net population growth during that period came from our immigrant populations, with China, Brazil, and the Dominican Republic now taking the lead. More than 2/3 of all Asian Americans in the greater Boston are today immigrant origin and currently comprise the largest immigrant population in our area. The Black immigrant population has nearly doubled since 1990, with growing numbers of new immigrants from Haiti, Cape Verde, Jamaica, as well as several countries in Africa. The Latino, Hispanic, Latinx population in the United States reached 62.1 million in 2020, up from 50 million in 2010. In 2020, Hispanics make nearly 1 in 5 folk in our country, up from 16% in 2010 and just 5% in 1970. To give you a sense of the magnitude, truly geologic in force, the Latino GDP today stands at over $2.6 trillion. Put another way, if it were a country, the Latino GDP would be in the top 10 in the world, slightly ahead of Italy, slightly behind India. Latinos are all Americans, new Americans, and double Americans. On the old, Spanish was spoken in what is now the United States a century before John Harvard sailed for the Commonwealth. On the new, some 2/3 of all Hispanics are either immigrants or the children of immigrants, but that too is changing, as we shall see shortly. On the double Americans, we share with the United States a landmass and the Caribbean basin, a cartography that figures decisively in the nature of the Latino experience, the Latinx experience in the United States. The broad features of immigration, if I can have the slide, please. Thank you kindly. If we can go to the second slide. Terrific. Thank you. The broad features of immigration over the last 4 generations in our country can be analytically, conceptually divided into 3 distinct chapters. The rise of labor migration during the pre- and war efforts, which ignited the largest migration flow in US history, as Mexicans responded to the call for braceros in US fields and farms. Second, the rise of family reunification in the aftermath of the 1965 Immigration Act, and most recently, now really, the rise of the second generation as the most important demographic feature of the Hispanic experience in our country. The 2020 census data, the preliminary data that have been released, suggests that US-born Hispanics have driven the growth of the US Latino population, a trend that accelerated very significantly in the decade of the 2010s. From 2010 to 2019, 9.3 million Hispanic babies were born in the US. This is a reversal of historic trends. In the 1980s and 90s, immigration drove the growth of the Hispanic origin population. Today, the US-born second generation is the most important, significant feature of the current chapter in the long Latino journey in the United States. There are other new drivers shaping the Latinx immigrant experience. War and terror, climate change, and environmental cataclysms are behind the largest movement of peoples since World War II. The recent exodus from the Central American Northern Triangle, as well as from Haiti, are a case in point. Yet another feature of contemporary Latino immigration that cast a long, long shadow on the Latino experience, but also in the experience of other ethnicities in our country, includes the unauthorized status and our DACA and Dreamer and what I prefer to call undocu-scholar student population. But first, some broad numbers. In our country today, approximately 27% of all public school students are of Hispanic origin. While Latinos are making progress, the quest for equity remains unfinished business. The data on the National Assessment of Educational Progress tell a story of ongoing gaps and pipelines in need of fixing. Only 21% of Latina fourth graders score at level deemed proficient or above proficiency in reading tests, while 46% of white students scored at the proficient or above level. Most notably and worrisome is the fact that the achievement gap in 2019 was 21 points, and it's not measurably different from the achievement gap in 1992. We will return to the matter of education below. Next, a word on global migrations. If I can have the next slide, please. In the modern era, migrations are complex, multi-determined, and escape vulgar mechanisms of causality. For the first time in human history, every continent on Earth is experiencing mass migrations as areas of emigration, transit areas, areas of immigration, and often all three at once. The new data suggests that the largest population movements now occur between South and West Asia, from Latin America to North America, and within Africa. Immigrants today are more diverse than ever before. They arrived in our country and in our Commonwealth from every continent on Earth. The latest data revealed a dynamic picture. In our country today, Asians now surpass Hispanics among those who have been in the US for 5 years or less. As noted before, after numerically dominating migration for about half a century, Latino immigration peaked in the early 2000s and has been ebbing ever since. New immigration from the Caribbean now exceeds all new immigration from Europe. The leading countries of emigration from Latin America today are Venezuela, Guatemala, and Honduras. Next slide, please. This is the global pattern with countries of origin and destination. It may be a little difficult to see, but it tells the story of how migrations are entirely global and how they augured a world that is ever more interconnected and ever more miniaturized. Immigration today is simply a condition of the human experience. Next slide, please. Unchecked climate change and natural disasters are new drivers of mass migration from Latin America. With the Northern Triangle in Central America, again, that is Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, as well as Haiti as Exhibit A. With climate change, the very fabric of life on Earth is at risk. We human beings are creating a new and dangerous phase in Earth's history. This has been termed the Anthropocene. That is, it captures the immense effects of human activity on all aspects of Earth's physical systems and on life on our planet. It's perhaps important to say that Homo sapiens sapiens has become a geologic force. The poorest of the planet, those who are relying still on 19th century technologies to meet basic needs, such as cooking and heating, are bearing the heavy brunt of the damages caused by the economic activities in the high and middle income countries in the world. Data from the Global Climate Risk Index report to what extent countries and regions have been affected by impacts of weather-related loss events, storms, floods, heat waves, wildfires, and the like. For the period between 1998 and 2017, it's notable that Puerto Rico, Honduras, and Myanmar ranked the highest. Indeed, of the 10 most affected countries for that 20-year period, in nine of the countries were in the low and lower middle income group. And Latin America is significantly overrepresented in countries facing long-term climate risks. Next slide, please. Historically, the clash of powerful nation states was the main driver of involuntary displacements or mass migrations. 2 world wars, the wars of colonial liberation and the Cold War, pushed millions to seek shelter in safer lands. By the end of World War II, Europe had more than 40 million refugees, then the largest number in recorded history. But the Second World War had another very important indirect impact on mass migration. The entrance of the United States into the war led to the creation of a guest worker program to recruit temporary Mexican braceros to labor in the US. Over half a century later, that temporary program led to the largest flow of immigrants into the US in our country's history. Likewise, the various temporary guest worker programs in Europe ended up delivering permanent immigrant communities now visible in Berlin, Brussels, Rotterdam, and elsewhere in Europe. Next, please. After holding for 3/4 of a century, the map tracing the major global migration corridors of the post-World War II era has become increasingly blurred. 4 disparate formations laid the foundations for a new emerging cartography. First, the dismemberment of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s and the end of the Cold War significantly accelerated human migrations, including migration from Latin America and the Caribbean to the United States. Second, the worldwide economic crisis of 2008 and the anti-government uprisings in North Africa and the Middle East beginning in 2010, the so-called Arab Spring, signal another very significant turning point. Third, former President Trump moves to make good on the campaign promises that elected him, rapidly stepping up deportations of unauthorized immigrants in the United States, building a 2,000-mile wall along the US-Mexican border, the halting of Syrian and other refugees from entering the United States, marked a decisive turning point in the global migration landscape. In the same vein, Brexit and the concurrent rise of nativist anti-immigrant movements in Western Europe and elsewhere marked the beginning of what is, I think, an entirely new cartography of mass migration. I need to also mention that the global pandemic has dramatically altered migration patterns worldwide. Today, mass migrations are increasingly defined by the slow motion disintegration of failing states with feeble institutions, war and terror, unchecked climate change, environmental dystopia, and demographic imbalances. Symbiotically, these are the forces, these are the drivers of what I have called the catastrophic migrations of the 21st century. In our country, as cross-border migration from Mexico began to significantly decline, Central Americans started a new cycle of exodus to the United States. From 2016 to 2020, the number of families from Honduras and Guatemala apprehended at the southern border doubled. Migration from El Salvador tripled between 2013 and 2016. And of course, we've seen a very significant rise in the number of family units and unaccompanied minors apprehended at the US southern border. Overall, the number of families seeking refuge shot up again, with the border control agents detaining over 135,000 children and parents during the first months of the in 2017. In recent weeks, we have all seen large increases in Haitian families arriving at the US southern border. The images of US agents charging their horses as immigrants and asylum seekers seek to enter the United States will represent, I think, a very, very significant turning point in the history of Latin American and Caribbean migration into our country. There are many reasons for the rapid kinetic expansion of migrants fleeing the Northern Triangle and Haiti. In Guatemala, the source of the most recent border crosses, environmental malfeasance, and land tenure clashes in the Western Highlands have engendered violence. Furthermore, depressed prices in global markets for Guatemalan commodities are pushing farmers their lands. Climate change and severe drought in El Salvador has resulted in food insecurity for millions, while deforestation has left Honduras more vulnerable to hurricanes. I think there's a moment here that announces a very, very new and worrisome dynamic. And that happened in 1998 when Hurricane Mitch left more than 11,000 dead, displaced more than 2.5 million Honduras, and announced before we fully understood the dangers of unchecked climate change to the forced migrations of human beings. But above all, war and terror are behind the humanitarian catastrophe in Central America and Haiti. The United States has a long history of involvement in the so-called dirty wars in those regions. John Coatsworth, the eminent Harvard historian, enumerates 41 occasions of United States-led regime change in Latin America and the Caribbean, 41 between 1898 and the turn of the millennium. Economist at Columbia, Jeff Sachs, has noted, quote, violent extra-constitutional overthrows of Latin American governments by the United States through a variety of means, including wars, coups, assassinations, electoral manipulation, and acts of provocation, has led to a giant humanitarian crisis. Most notably, and again, driving a very new and different dynamic in the Hispanic flow to the United States, we need to note that approximately 5 million Venezuelans have been displaced abroad, and we're witnessing in our country a rapid growth of the Venezuelan origin population in the United States. From 2010 to 2020, the Venezuelan population in the United States increased by over 125%, by far the fastest growth. Guatemalans saw an increase of almost 50%, followed by an increase of 47% in the Honduran origin population. These three are examples of forcibly displaced population seeking shelter, escaping rachitic regimes, kleptocratic regimes, war and terror, and climate change. Next, please. Immigration generates a powerful demographic echo. As families arrive with children and reunify, the children of immigrants take the center stage. The children of immigrants are the fruit born of immigration. In the Commonwealth, this morning, children from over 100 different countries and territories got up, went to schools. And that is something that simply never happened before in human history. One city encompasses the entire range of the human experience. But this is the new normal in cities in the high and increasingly middle-income countries around the world. In Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague, two-thirds of all children in schools today come from immigrant origin homes. In Berlin, 40% of the children that got up this morning to go to schools come from an immigrant background, have an immigrant background. In Stockholm, some 38% of students come from immigrant origin homes. In Paris, a third of the children come from immigrant or refugee origin homes. In our country, today, 27% of children under age of 18 have an immigrant parent. Their growth has been rapid. In 1970, the population of immigrant origin children and youth stood at 6% of the total population of children and youth. It reached 20% by 2000, and today, again, it is 27%, and it's projected to be at approximately over a third of the entire child and youth population in our country by the year 2050. The children of immigrants are an integral part of the national tapestry. Their education and well-being touches large swaths of the child population in our country. Their story is deeply, deeply intertwined with the future of Boston, the future of the Commonwealth, indeed, the future of our nation. Here are some unique features in the condition of our immigrant origin population when it comes to children. While we are less than 5% of the world's population, we have between a fifth and a fourth of all unauthorized immigrants on Earth. The US unauthorized immigrant population rose rapidly from 1990 to 2007, before declining sharply for 2 years and stabilizing around 2017, 2018 at about 10 million. Today, nationally, 1 in 50 students enrolled in higher education in our country is undocumented. Roughly 1,000 undocumented students graduate from Massachusetts high schools every year, and nearly 12,000 are enrolled today in higher education campuses across the Commonwealth. While these students face many similar challenges to other urban first-generation college-going students in the Commonwealth and throughout our country, they also face added uncertainties due to unpredictable court rulings, legislation, and federal and state policy decisions over which they have little control. There have been a series of unsuccessful attempts to pass the Dreamer legislation in our country over the past decades. They have been consistently aborted. In 2012, by executive order, President Obama put in place DACA. In fact, the architect of DACA was my former boss, the former president of the University of California, Janet Napolitano. DACA provided a 2-year protection from deportation and the right to work, which was renewable, but DACA did not provide reprieve from the fears of family and deportations, or more importantly for our immigrant Dreamer and DocuScholar students, in-state tuition. In approximately 32 states, including in the Commonwealth, they do not qualify for in-state tuition. I think the scholarly evidence suggests that liminality marks the experience of these young people, and we see in the near term no resolution in sight. The most recent estimates suggest that the 4.5 million US-born citizen children younger than 18 who are currently living in the United States with at least one parent who is an unauthorized immigrant. Like the DACA, Dreamer, and DocuScholar phenomenon, this is a very, very unique and a very troubling formation. Citizen children of undocumented parents, the majority of them Hispanics, also pay a heavy penalty in their socio-emotional and cognitive development. They exhibit lower levels of cognitive development and emotional well-being throughout early childhood and adolescence than comparable children whose parents do not have the unauthorized immigration burden. These ill effects result primarily from a variety of psychosocial stresses and distresses in the homes where citizen children are growing up under the shadow of the law because one or more of their parents lacks the authorized permit to live in the United States. The research that has produced the findings carefully isolated the impact of unauthorized immigration status from other factors, such as race, income, levels of education among the parents, and the like. As early as ages 2 and 3, children of undocumented parents, according to Professor Hiro Yoshikawa, the former academic dean at the Harvard School of Education, working with a team of an interdisciplinary team of scholars, have shown lower cognitive skills as measured by standardized tests than comparable samples of children of parents who have no immigration issues. The research shows that, quote, the lack of a pathway to citizenship for their parents is harmful to the children's development, particularly their cognitive and language skills, end of quote. During the turbulent years of adolescence, the youth of parents who lack documentation pay an additional penalty in their development. Researchers have studied patterns of depression and anxiety among Latino Hispanic youth. They find that, quote, having an undocumented parent has been associated with higher levels of anxiety and depressive symptoms among youth. Youth also exhibit behaviors of self-isolation, of restricting social interactions for fear of exposing the family's immigration status. Another survey found Latino immigrant youth over the age of 12 found that the parents' legal vulnerability and the impact, the tension and deportation results in extremely negative effects on the so-called mood disorders, that is the socio-emotional development, emotional well-being, and academic performance of those citizen youth. In the first national study of its kind, the National Study of Undocumented Scholars in U.S. College, a UCLA team led by Marcelo Suárez-Orozco and Robert Teranishi found in a survey of over 900 college students, more than 3/4 expressed worried about deportation and more than half reporting knowing someone who had been deported. These worries and other aspects of insecurity that come from being an unauthorized college student translate into measurable consequences for the respondents' health. Among male subjects, 24% produced scores on standardized anxiety screenings that were above the cutoff for clinical diagnosis. For females, it was an extraordinarily high 31%. In comparison, the shares in the population of college students with no reason to fear deportation would be 4% and 9%, respectively. Another concern for the Latino origin population in the United States flows from current immigration policies that make family separations normative. In the 21st century, to migrate is to separate families. El día que se fue mi mamá, yo sentí como si mi corazón se estuviera quedando con ella. Ella era mi vida. Sentí como si una luz se había apagado. This is a child from Central America who saw her mother go ahead and migrate beforehand. Another child says, yo no sabía con quién iba a vivir o cómo iba a ser mi vida. Yo había oído acerca de mi papá, pero no lo conocía. In reflecting upon the journey to reunified with a father who had long left her native Haiti, and upon the child's arrival here in the Commonwealth. The phrase that takes my breath away is, I had heard about my father, but I didn't know who he was. Another child from Guatemala, yo estaba llorando porque estaba dejando a mi abuelito. Estaba muy confundido. Yo quería ver a mi mamá, pero no quería dejar de ver a mi abuelito. So I was crying because when I came to the US, I had to leave my abuelito, my grandpa, behind. I was very confused. I wanted to be with my mother. I wanted to see my mother. She had migrated earlier. But to me, I did not really want to leave my grandfather behind. Millions of Latino children and youth today find themselves in a space of perpetual mourning, either mourning the relatives as they migrate ahead to the United States, or when it's their turn to join them, mourning the relatives they have to leave behind in Latin America. To conclude, we are celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, and what an important occasion that is for our country and for our Commonwealth. The Latino journey in the United States is at once local, it's a feature of our life in Boston, in Cambridge, in the Commonwealth. It is at once local, but it is part of a much more larger global story. It is a national and a transnational dynamic field. It is a timely and it is a timeless theme recurring in the history of our country. Today, via Hispanic immigration, but more importantly, via the rise of the second generation, Hispanics are once again remaking America. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This is a lot of information. I think I'll turn it over so we can have some questions. Adriana.
Thank you so much, Dr. Suarez-Orozco. We do have some questions coming in the Q&A. So let's see, this first one is from an anonymous attendee. Says, thank you, Dr. Suarez-Orozco. What can we do as an individual and a community to support the DACA undocu scholars? What can we do to make a difference?
Thank you so much. That's such an important question. And we, as citizens, of course, have a great deal of voice and a great deal of agency to act upon our beliefs and to act in ways that would further the interest of all our communities. I think the most important issue today facing our DACA dreamer, I prefer the term undocu scholar term, is really to act immediately on in-state tuition for our students. It's very, very difficult. Our research, the research of many others, has shown that the fragility makes, in terms of economy and in terms of responsibilities, it makes their journeys through higher education extremely challenging and extremely complex. So it's a shame. I've testified before the legislature. I'm very happy to say that my testimony was endorsed in an editorial by the editorial page of the Boston Globe. I think we need to make the Commonwealth an in-state tuition state for our unauthorized immigrant origin students. It's very interesting to me that it's even red states, even purple states in our country today have in-state tuition for their undocu scholars, and the Commonwealth is lagging behind. So write to your governor, write to your congresspeople, write to your legislature if this is indeed an issue that you feel strongly in support of giving our students who have played by the books. They've grown in our, they've gone to our schools. They played Little League. They played soccer. They played by the rules. They graduated from their high schools. They are accepted at the great universities in the Commonwealth and beyond. Yet they carry this enormous, they have to swim against this enormous undertow. So in-state tuition is an area where important work remains to be done. More broadly, I firmly believe that we have a category of fellow human beings through no fault of their own find themselves growing up in the shadows of the law. And what the country needs, where we haven't been able to achieve, is comprehensive immigration reform. We need to get in front, especially of the issues pertinent to this population of youngsters and children whose lives are so much shaped by the shadow of living in a legal limbo in terms of their opportunities in our economy and in our society currently and moving forward.
To follow up on what you were saying about in-state tuition, I'm curious about at the federal level, many of us receive, federal student loans and things like this. are there other areas in terms of of the federal government that also need to be reformed for these students to, go to higher education? I'm also thinking, coming from science, we, a lot of times we apply for federal grants for our research. So what kind of barriers are there for these students currently?
Yeah, thank you, Diana. The barriers are many, and they're in some cases are immense. Our undocumented scholars, our dreamers, are not allowed to access federal resources, either for tuition or for living or for research related matters. So during my years at Harvard, during my years at NYU, at the private universities, and also, of course, at the University of California and at UMass Boston, what we see is that we have to create special philanthropic develop special philanthropic vehicles to be able to support the research, the tuition and the like for our undocumented scholars. And again, we need to do better than that. We need to get in front of this issue that is affecting the lives of so many of our members of our of the family of the Commonwealth. So that will require federal action. And I think the gold standard here is comprehensive immigration reform. And it took actually a Massachusetts politician and a California politician, a Republican and a Democrat, Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House, and Ronald Reagan, the former governor of California, obviously President of the United States, to develop a vehicle called comprehensive immigration reform. And that was the law of the land, and that eased the transition of significant numbers of children and youth into the light, into the open air, into the opportunities they so deserve to have a fair chance to compete at in our country.
Great. We have another question related. Someone's asking, what can we individually do to support undocumented immigrants? So other than writing to our representatives, what else might you suggest?
So let me tell the story that was shared by me, and at the end of it, I'll tell you who it was. Somebody who's very prominent in the philanthropic world came to see me one day and said, for the time my husband was very ill, once a week, I drove across the 101. Those of you from California know what that is. And to the other side of Palo Alto, to East Palo Alto, and I volunteered and I taught English. I tutored English. I was a mentor to many immigrant origin children in the East Palo Alto school district. And when my husband was very ill, I feel that they gave me much more than I gave them in terms of the engagement and in terms of the authentic and meaningful organic relationship she was able to forge with so many young people she was tutoring. And her name is Laureen Powell Jobs, and her husband was Steve Jobs. You can tutor, you can volunteer, you can help with the legal petitions, you can help with we discovered that unauthorized status and English language learning were by far the most significant issues in the lives of newly arrived immigrant origin kids. They desperately want to learn English. Our data, the late data, I ran the Harvard immigration projects for a decade. The data show just an enormous kinetic momentum towards acquiring the language. I very much hope that doesn't mean abandoning Spanish, the Spanish they have with them. I think cognitive neuroscience has entirely changed our understandings of the enormous advantages that flow from multilingualism. And it's just sad. One of my colleagues at Harvard once said, the US is a cemetery for languages. The German brought German, the Italians brought Italian, the Japanese brought Japanese, and all these languages died in our country. I hope that's no longer the case. I hope that we become a society where we offer all our children, not just our immigrant origin children, the benefits that flow from the opportunities to learn in more than one language. So those are issues that I think where you, MIT students and faculty and staff can fundamentally alter the trajectory of our newcomers. I think that our schools are struggling. Our schools need to do better, and you can do enormous good. MIT has a long history. In fact, you have a long history of extraordinary excellence. I don't have to remind you that you have a Latino president, but you know, in every domain of basic science. I mean, Mario Molina, our thoughts are with him. As the new prizes in the sciences we're giving, who was a Mexican immigrant and who fundamentally changed our understanding of so much in his own field of chemistry. So I think MIT has a long history, and I hope the students continue that tradition.
So I had actually a question. I was wondering, what are you working on right now?
Yeah. So I'm working on two things. I'm releasing, so we just released a major book on the catastrophic migrations of the 21st century. University of California Press published that. The Holy Father, Pope Francis, asked me to take the lead on the matter of education moving forward. And this is a non-denominational global undertaking, and the product of a major research initiative that was organized by the Pontifical Academies, founded by Galileo, on the issue of a global compact for education around the world. That will be released by Columbia University Press in the next few months. And currently I'm in the middle of organizing a major undertaking on children and youth in and after COVID. I think COVID has been a catastrophic educational emergency for children around the world. Still today, over 150 million children and youth in Latin America have no access, zero access to online education. This has been just catastrophic in terms of child abuse, in terms of trafficking of children, in terms of suicidality and suicide. So we're beginning to gather scholars from around the world to commission new research on what have the impacts of COVID been on the child and youth and emerging adult population the world over, and what have we learned from COVID, and what are the levels of change that need to be in place for the next catastrophic medical emergency. So those are the main issues I'm working on today, but mostly my day job, I'm a chancellor running a university.
Thank you, Adriana, for moderating, and thank you all for those who asked questions. And as Marcelo so eloquently pointed out, the demographics of this nation and the world are changing, and we need to make sure that we are changing our ways to meet the needs of tomorrow. And I think we have heard how locally we can influence this. And for us, especially in higher education, we have a unique and important obligation to be part of this change and ensure we support the students of tomorrow. This is certainly an important conversation, and we are so grateful that we were able to have that with you. Thank you, Marcelo, and thanks everyone for joining. This is really wonderful and really nice to meet you. even
Okay,
if virtual.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Adriana, thank you. You did a great job moderating. Stay safe.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.